Hello, in the last video we covered how to start the Airbus A320 aircraft, how to program the McDo, and how to start the engines. In this video, we'll cover the taxi, takeoff, cruise, and descent planning in the Airbus A320 family aircraft. If you haven't watched part 1, I suggest you go watch that now. Now without further ado, let's get started. Alright, we got the engines running, we've got the flaps set, we've got all the lights on for taxi. What we need to do now is taxi to the runway, do our pre-departure checks, and then depart. So I'm going to pull over here on my EFB, my charts, pull up Syracuse, ground charts, and pull up my airport diagram. Now we're taking off runway 28, so we're going to taxi, let's say, Tango, Bravo, Alpha to the runway. Alright, so what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and flip off our brake, and the aircraft will automatically start rolling if it's on level ground, just because of the thrust of the engine. However, if you're uphill, you're going to have to give it a little bit of juice to get it going. So as we start taxiing, we're going to start doing our pre-departure checks. We want to set our auto brake to max. This is in case we have to reject takeoff. It'll automatically begin the max braking on the aircraft without you have to put any inputs on your toe brakes. Next, we're going to go ahead and turn on or arm our ground spoilers. To do that, we're going to look in between and pull this handle up. As we taxi, one of the things that you'll want to turn on as you get away from any type of population, people, aircraft, or facilities is your weather radar. And this is generally, in the flight sim you could turn it on now and nothing would happen. Now in the real world, if you turned on the weather radar while you're sitting there at the gate, you're going to be irradiating everyone inside the terminal with that radar. And those radars are pretty powerful. Now, some people would like to have children later, so please don't irradiate the people inside the terminal. But since we're out here, there's no other aircraft around us, we can go ahead and turn on our weather radar. So once we get straightened up here, I don't want to do it in a turn, because then I could end up off the taxiway. Because unlike in the real aircraft, I don't have a first officer. Alright, now that we're straightened up here, what I'm going to do is go again down below, and I'm going to turn our PWS to auto. Now we can turn our systems to 1, and what that's going to do is turn on our radar system. Now, it's currently not properly modeled, and that's because of the way Microsoft interprets weather and other things, as far as I'm aware. So with the weather radar on, one of the last things that we have to worry about is doing our takeoff config test. Now, we can go ahead and do that to now, even though we're short of the runway, and it's going to give us a takeoff config normal. That means the takeoff configuration of the aircraft is normal, and we don't really have to worry about anything else. Now we're going to taxi all the way to the runway, and holding short of the runway, we're going to do a few more check items before we take off. All right, as we approach the departure end of our runway, what we want to do is normally do a takeoff brief, but again, that's getting into some real world stuff that we're not going to really worry about in the simulator here. What we do want to do though is we want to turn on our lights. So if we go overhead panel here, we're going to turn on our landing lights, switch our nose gear light to take off, and strobes to auto. We can turn on our wing lights too. Usually you leave those off unless it's during the day, or during the night, but we can turn those on as well. One of the last things we want to do before we depart is in the center console over by the transponder. It's flipping our traffic alert system to TARA. This will activate our traffic avoidance and announcement system, which will basically allow us to know, hey, there's traffic in the area. It'll scream out at you if you have collision course or anything like that. All right, let's go ahead and get onto the runway and get lined up. Now, if you're on VATSIM or some other air traffic control network, don't enter the runway until you're cleared to do so. Or if you're in an uncontrolled environment, aka there's no air traffic control on above you, then you can enter it at your own risk, making the appropriate radio calls on the control frequency or CTAF. Now, a hint here, as you approach the center line, right when your nose hits that center, you want to go ahead and start that turn. Don't do a full deflection. I usually do about a half deflection, and that usually lines me up pretty solid onto that center line. Center line here in the Airbus is going to be between this caution butt and this flathead screw screw right here. Basically right dead center of here is your center line, if you're properly lined up according to the lineup balls here. So straight down the middle, we're on runway 28, that's been confirmed. Now we could take off now, but what I want to do is show a couple things before we take off. So down here in the McDo, you can see we have a flex takeoff temp of 55 degrees. This is a reduced thrust setting for the aircraft. Now, if you had toga here, then you would go full toga. But since we have flex takeoff temp, we're going to do flex takeoff temp. On the throttle right here, you can see different detents. You have auto throttle, climb, flex MCT, and toga. Flex MCT will activate that flex temp, and you'll see that when we do that. Toga would be full power takeoff, go around power. Today we're going to do a flex temp takeoff. So we're going to make sure that we move the throttles to flex MCT when we take off. We'll start by increasing the throttles to approximately 50%. There's 50%. Release the brakes. And there's our flex plus 55 annunciator. We're going to keep a slight downward pressure on the nose. About 80, we start releasing that pressure to get nose that neutral at about 100 knots. There's V1, and then rotate, just a slight nose up pressure, nice smooth. Not want to deflect more than 12 degrees initially, and then up to about 15. And we're taking off here. Once there's no runway remaining, we'll bring that gear up. Now, if I turn on the autopilot now, we're just going to fly into infinity on runway at 28. Literally, we'll just continue on this direction for eternity. So if we hit autopilot 1, which turns on the autopilot, we're going to continue to climb, trying to catch that speed, and then flying at 280 degrees off into eternity. Because if you look at our display, you can see Syracuse is over here. Now it wants us to reduce our climb, our throttles to lever to climb. So we're in thrust climb now. We'll go ahead and start bringing our flaps and slats up according to the schedule right here on the left-hand side ticker tape. Now at this point, normally you would get a rudder vector from ATC. So for example, if I press the middle button here, we switch over to heading mode, and then I can vector the aircraft, right, I could vector it left, just using this heading bug knob. And that's important because let's say I get vectored to 320. As it's speeding up to 250 knots on a vector of 320, let's say then we get cleared direct to a waypoint, which is very common when you don't have an actual standard instrument departure. When you're getting vectored, you're probably going to be cleared to a specific waypoint after an initial vector of some degrees. So let's say we get cleared to 320. If we go down to our McDo and hit the DIR button, it's kind of hard to see because of that glare. DIR, which is direct to. Now Syracuse, SYR, VOR is now behind us because it was a waypoint that was only 5 miles off the airport. But if we go to Dines, which is our next waypoint, select it, and then do direct to insert, what's going to automatically happen is from your position, it's going to automatically switch to nav and turn you onto the course to that waypoint. This is a very common when you don't have a standard instrument departure. Like I said, you don't have multiple waypoints you're flying to. You're going to get a vector off the ground, and then they're going to tell you direct to. Now, if you're flying offline and they tell you and you don't have any ATC, you can pretty much decide what you want to do. It's really up to you. But in general, going direct to the next waypoint is a viable option. Now, if you are flying a standard instrument departure, you don't even have to worry about that. If it's an RNAV departure, you're just going to be flying that RNAV all the way out. All right, we can go ahead and disable our ground spoilers. Don't need those anymore. And wait for 10,000 feet. Now, we're currently in open climb. Because we went to heading mode, it automatically switched us off of what they call just climb. Now it's open climb. So if I switch this back to regular climb here, which I can do by right-clicking. Now it shows climb. Though the difference between open climb and climb is important. Okay, we're about to cross 10,000 feet, so let me do a couple things, and then let me explain the difference between the two, because they are very different, and they do matter. All right, so overhead panel, 10,000 feet in the United States means turning off our landing lights, our turn-off lights, and our nose lights. And we can turn the wing lights off as well. So you really should only have your strobes, beacon, and nav lights on once you pass 10,000 feet. After you pass 10,000 feet, the 250 knot restriction is gone. Now we can speed up to our actual climb speed, which in this case is going to be 288 knots. 288 or 10? Let's see. 287 knots. All right, the next required thing would be at 18,000 feet. So while we're climbing up to 18,000 feet, let me explain to you the difference between climb and open climb. Open climb is basically, it's a set speed that your aircraft is going to climb as fast as it can in feet vertically while maintaining that speed. Now you can manually set the speed using the speed option. You can set it to 210 knots if you wanted to, and then tell it to climb, and it's going to climb, especially a A320 or A319, especially 319, is going to climb like a rocket. Now, a 321 is still going to be a little sluggish because of how much weight it is carrying. But a 319, I'm telling you right now, when the IAE engine is just going to, it's like a bat out of hell, man. It is freaking fast on its climb out, okay? So open climb basically disregards any restrictions along your route. So let's say Dines, for example, had a altitude restriction on a departure, which does occur. Let's say it was 10,000 feet. Well, obviously we're over 10,000 feet now, but well, let's just say for this example, it's 15,000 feet. If we're on open climb, it would go through that restriction. It doesn't care. It's just gonna climb as fast as it can up to the set speed or set altitude here, which is in this case 32,000 feet. It's disregarding any speed restrictions or any altitude restrictions. It's just open climbing. It's going as fast as it can, as high as it can. Regular climb is going to obey those restrictions or those constraints. So it's important to know the difference, because if you're flying a particular departure procedure that has restricted speeds and altitudes, you need to make sure you're in the right modes. In this case, thrust climb and nav, as we can see indicated on our PFD, our primary flight display. Thrust climb, and nav, with altitude in a light blue. That means it's armed, by the way. Green means it's active, blue means it's armed. In the same way, when you're descending, you have two options for your descent. Well, there's a lot of different options, but in general, when you're doing a vertical navigation descent, you have open descent and descent. The same way open climb and climb is different is the same for descent. Open descent is going to ignore any of those speed restrictions or altitude restrictions. It's just going to get as fast as it can down to the altitude you've set in the MCP altitude selector. So if you had it, 5,000 feet, it's just going to, as fast as it can get down to 5,000 feet at engine's idle, it's going to do it at whatever speed you have it set to. All right, we're passing 18,000 feet, which means we're pulling standard, which is funny because it's literally the same exact 299 or 2, so it doesn't really matter. But pull standard there for your barometric pressure over 18,000 feet here in the United States. If you're overseas, and let's say Europe or Africa or something like that, your standard transition altitude might be different. That's going to be dependent on your whatever your departure is, your country you're in, all those types of regulations. But in the United States, it's 18,000 feet across the board. All right, so we talked about open climbs, open descents. We talked about, open climbs, open descent. What is a regular descent, or DES, what it's going to indicate? A CLB here, it would indicate DES. A descent, a regular descent, is going to be something that's going to follow a particular altitude restrictions. It's going to follow speed restrictions, which is really important if you're on a specific type of arrival that requires those restrictions, which almost every star out there, standard arrival, has those restrictions in place. Not all, but most. So just making sure you're in the right modes is important. Now, if that's the case, why does open descent and open climb even exist? If that's a question you're asking, it's a good question to ask, and here's why it's there. So it's there in case, let's say you are flying along and you're on a certain standard arrival. Let's say we're going to Indianapolis, we're in a certain standard arrival, and they're like, hey, ATC's like, hey, turn right heading 270, descend and maintain 6,000 feet, vectors for final. All right, so you're on an arrival, but they take you off an arrival. Well, now you can turn in your heading bug to 270, descend, set your MCP altitude down to 6,000, and then select open descent. That's going to get you down to that 6,000 feet as quickly as possible. That's a great thing to do if you're an Airbus. Airbuses, in general, they're slippery. They're going to hold speed longer than your Boeings will. Okay, so when you're flying, you want to make sure you're managing the speed well on an Airbus. So getting down sooner is advisable, so you can manage that speed so you don't come in way too fast on the approach. You'll see me do that once we get to Indianapolis. All right, I think we've talked enough about open climbs and open descents and climbs and descents. I don't think we need to beat that horse any more than we already have. Since we're in a nice stable environment, we're not expecting any type of, turbulence or anything like that. I'm probably going to go up here, turn off the seatbelt signs, let people walk around in the back so they can go use the restroom without feeling guilty. Because that's honestly, that's about all people do on short flights like this. They're not going to be going and sprinting up and down the aisles or something, which I guess you could do. Kind of weird. All right, so once we get up to climb, all we're going to really do is monitor our systems, make sure our fuel's good, make sure we're not, going off course, anything like that. So we're pretty much done here until we reach our climb or our cruise, and we're going to pick this up about 60 to 80 miles from top of descent so that we can talk about our descent planning into Indianapolis. We are now approximately 100 nautical miles away from top of descent. That's indicated with this white line pointing downwards with a little arrow at the end. That lets us know that's the estimated top of descent for the aircraft that's already done all the calculations based on the constraints of our arrival. Speaking of constraints on arrival, let's talk about our arrival here. I've already gone ahead and pulled up the Snake Pit 2 RNAV arrival chart. This is through Navigraph. If you don't have Navigraph, you can pull charts from SkyVector. You can pull them from Chart Fox is another one, or you can even pull them up if you're in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 in the EFB. You can pull up charts by going to Flight Planner, typing in the airport, say, let's do KIND, Indianapolis, selecting the chart icons, arrivals, and then you can find the Snake Pit 2 arrival. And we can have a chart here. So that's also an option if you don't have paid charts like I do. All right, so let's talk about this. So on the Snake Pit 2 arrival, we've got different altitude restrictions indicated by these blue text right here. Now, if you're confused about this chart, I have a whole video that talks about the stars or the standard arrivals. Recommend you go look that up. But what we're looking for here is for our waypoint. So we know RCAB, we need below 2,000, Snake Pit between 14,000 and 19,000, Babin 11.5, 15, so forth and so on, all the way down. And we're going to be on this northern side here, the way nub, and then we're going to vector ourselves onto the ILS from a 05 left. The why you want to check these is because sometimes if the nav data is out of date or something's changed on the chart, you want to make sure that your restrictions are all correct. So if I go down here to my McDo and I select flight plan, I can see we're on the Snake Pit 2 arrivals, what we're going for. And then on the right hand side, I can see the constraints. So on the left side of the slash, the speed. On the right side of the slash is the altitude. So as I page down, you'll see we have a restriction, flight level 200, and then we know this is below, and no speed restriction. No speed restriction on Snake Pit, no speed restriction on Babney, but we do have the 15,000 feet altitude restriction. And it keeps going all the way down, 250 knots restriction on the speed, 11,000 feet, 230 knots, 775, which is just a pass through, 210 knots at night at 6,000 feet, and so forth. And then we have our manual discontinuity, which we're going to vector us onto the approach with Kelly. So now that we've gone through that, we verified this information, that all of these are correct and are accurate. We're not missing anything. Everything is, correct altitudes, correct speeds, everything like that. What we want to do now is set our MCP altitude, which is this guy over here. We want to set that to our lowest altitude on our arrival. So in this case, we're going to put in 6,000 feet. Now, depending on your arrival, that would change, and you'll just have to adjust as whatever flight you're flying. But in this case, 6,000 feet. So we can go ahead and adjust our altitude on the MCP to 6,000. The aircraft won't automatically start descending. Unlike a Boeing, Airbus requires you to input a command to start a descent. Now, we don't want to start our descent until we're at basically the altitude or the top of descent point on our route of flight. We don't want to start it too early. However, I will say starting it about 10 miles before the top of descent, I have found to be a little bit smoother on its arrival, and I've been told that some Airbus pilots do the same thing. Again, just up to you. I like starting it a little bit early just so the aircraft does have a little bit more time to slow down. Again, Airbus is typically speed's going to be the thing that you're going to have to manage the most. So we've verified our arrival, but what we need to do now is input the performance data. So if we go to the perf page or performance and select next phase, and this descent, and then next phase again, we have our destination approach phase. We need to input all of this information correctly. Now, if you're in the Fenix, you can pull the weather information or the ATIS through the McDo. If you're in ToLiss, it's a little different, or if you're in some other aircraft, it's completely different. But here in the Fenix, what we can do is we can hit the WX weather request. We're going to select the METAR, and we're going to put in the identifier for kind, and select send. Hit return. Received messages. We've received the weather data, and we select it. And then it's going to give us the information. Now, as you can see here, it's telling us at 0405, or at today's the 4th of August at 0054 Zulu, winds were 040 at 7, 10 statute miles availability, scattered at 55, scattered at 25,000, temperature is 24, 13 degrees dew point, altimeter is 3008, and don't worry about the remarks. That's not necessary for this information, this tutorial. But these are actually really interesting. That's like true temperature, sea level pressure. Like, it's kind of cool. Anyway, so we won't get into that. But for the sake of this is the actual real world weather. This is pulling a live weather from the FAA, or from the, not FAA, but the aviation weather. However, if you're not flying on VATSIM, you're not flying online, you're flying in a specific weather environment like I am right now, this information is going to be incorrect. So how do you know what the weather is? Well, you can always check your weather right here, and that'll tell you what it is. I already know, because I already set it, what this weather is going to be, because this is custom weather. I didn't want to be dealing with a ton of winds and a ton of other stuff while I'm trying to teach y'all. But so for QNH, we're going to put in 2992 because that is what the barometric pressure is at the airport. Temperature, I know is going to be 15 degrees Celsius. And winds, I know is going to be 270 at 4. All right. Now we have this information. We have transition altitude. This is actually going to be 180. And VAP's fine, VLS is fine. Now over here you have the option to change your landing configuration from full to configure 3. I generally going to keep full unless I'm in a really windy environment. If you're in a really windy environment, you may only go flaps 3, but for this we're going to be flaps full. Now what about this right here? These are your minimums. So you have your radio minimums and your barometric minimums. Not going to get into the difference in this tutorial. Again, I've got other tutorials talking about that. But in this case, if we go over here to our approach chart and ILS localizer 5, zoom in here, our ILS decision altitude is 947 feet barometric. So put 947 into our barometric, and we've entered in our arrival data. All right, so what's left? What do we got to do? Well, we've got to start our descent. But this is going to conclude part 2 of the series. If this video was helpful, please smash that like button and subscribe. Your comments, likes, and subscriptions help others find these tutorials. In the next video, we're going to cover the descent, arrival, the ILS approach, and landing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time up in the sky.